It's a very important campaign because most people think that poverty is the fault of people in poverty, that they're not doing enough to look after themselves, look after their family and get a job. And this campaign is one of many messages that go out to avert the public at large that poverty is also about the way society treats people, and the way collectively we look down on people in poverty, and we discriminate against them on the way they're dressed or the way they speak or where they're from. And I think this campaign will open people's minds to our collective responsibility to be alongside and to support people in poverty. So I'm all for it.
Well, I think the campaign who wants to put discrimination in the law among the 10 others that have been in the law for a long time is very important. And because so many people suffer from discrimination, and so it will be a huge hope, and especially that campaign has been very creative and getting a lot of support because people believe it's not right, there is such discrimination at so many levels.
Well, I'm surprised that it's not already considered grounds for discrimination. I think that class, socioeconomic status is evident in so many parts of everyday life that it's ignorance if we don't include it in our kind of consciousness. I think that class is kind of evident in so many elements of everyday life, whether it's the way you speak or dress or look, or kind of the minute that you walk into a room, people are making 10 assumptions about you, and class definitely underpins a lot of them. I think it's the root of a lot of kind of presenting issues, and I think that if it was considered in our legislation, it would directly, it would just have direct communication with an element of discrimination that seems to be totally ignored, and it would just bring a lot of public attention to the fact that there are groups in society that have been neglected, and that they don't have the same resources, they don't have the same opportunities as other groups in society. And I think that if we start kind of having conversations around that, I think that's the most important thing, so that everyone can so that these backgrounds, these classes can feel heard and included and understood. And there won't be so much hate and separation that's evident now in Dublin with various different riots and stuff. I think that people will actually be heard a lot more than they are now. I think social workers are often in a different. They're definitely in a different position than those that they work with, and the people that they work with are often kind of working class people that are coming from disadvantaged areas that have had different life experiences to us, to social workers, and I think that if you include if social workers are practicing in kind of informed manner, then they can kind of then they can actually really have a kind of inclusive kind of practice that sees the person within the context of where they are. That it's not just seeing the symptoms. It's not just seeing that there's there's maybe like child protection concerns, like for example that they're actually seeing, okay, so this family doesn't have the ability to provide for their child, and kind of like if we view that from a lens of like socioeconomic status, like social class, that it kind of like gives us more of a kind of understanding of where that person is coming from, how there may be differences between the social worker and the service user, like how like it gives an understanding for like the potential difference, the differences that will come up. You know, like a social worker may come from a middle class background, for example, and they're working with someone from a working class background. They have different life experiences, and I think that if this law was in place, or if this was in our consciousness a lot more, it would give us a lot more understanding. It would kind of stimulate our kind of like conversations around the differences, the kind of perceived differences, and how like we can kind of have a kind of poverty aware practice that's kind of just like well informed to like all other backgrounds as well.
It's important because to see those other generations of people understand what we're trying to fight for, and we're trying to make sure all the pieces are together, and we're trying to fight to make changes in the legislation and make sure government can include the missing piece of the jigsaw.
Okay, thank you. I don't like. Do you want to say something else about? I didn't have. Usually people talk. Yeah. Why do you like? Yeah, that's the question we asked like last week in the streets. Why do you think people from working class background or are excluded from decisions that are made for themselves?
Because they possibly have a disability, they possibly are in social economic disadvantaged backgrounds, and the government and people are excluding them from society, and we're trying to get government to put a new legislation in place where they can be included, and that's why I think the ATD to 10 campaign is important.
I think the ATD to 10 campaign is really great. I'm from the US, and we don't have any law for socioeconomic discrimination or against socioeconomic discrimination, and I think it's really important. And from like learning more about Ireland and kind of the class structure and some of the barriers to participation, I think that they're very similar to discrimination on the basis of race or gender, and I think that it should be treated the same and considered as much of a problem as anything else. And obviously there's a lot of intersectionality within race and gender and socioeconomic status, and I think that it is important to touch on all of them. After being here in Ireland, I've met so many different people and heard so many different stories, and hearing about healthcare, how socioeconomic discrimination affects people, getting proper treatments or food or education and jobs and employment. It's a big problem, and I think that tackling this issue will be a great way to help a lot of people. in conversations with people in the public, a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, a few people have said that, like, they don't really think it's real and they don't think that it really exists here in Ireland. And I think having the government, you know, come out and say, yeah, this is a thing, this is something that we need to address, will, you know, let people know that, well, just think twice next time they want to discriminate against someone. Be like, you know, this is not okay, because I feel like it's one thing, like, obviously saying you cannot, you know, be racist, you can't be sexist, like, doesn't, like, the government saying that doesn't make it so people don't act that way, but it, you know, makes them think maybe for a second, like, this is not right, and, you know that they're doing something wrong. And I think it will, you know, have, like, at least a little impact, and I think that it's better than nothing.
My own personal thoughts, the other nine are kind of null and void if you're not protected by the 10th ground, which is socio-economic discrimination, which is basically means if you're coming from an area which has a lack of resources, there's a disadvantage in your community, you're kind of covered by the other 9 grounds of equality legislation in this country. But you could have a case on any of the 9 grounds, but if you're coming from a socio-economic background, you don't have access to the law, you don't have resources within the law or recourse within the law. So kind of being covered by the other 9 grounds, but being a person of coming from a socio-economic background which is disadvantaged, means to me, and I know people who have experienced it, don't benefit from the 9 grounds because they suffer on the 10th ground. That isn't law just yet at the moment, which is part of our campaign, because we've been out and about doing this campaign, and a lot of people, it took a while to convince people that the other 9 are kind of as useful as they are. We're excluding people by not having the 10th ground, and we got talking to a lot of people, and when we explained it to them in that manner, they kind of went, oh yeah, that makes a bit of sense, you know, because people explained their own story, that they came from disadvantage and they couldn't get their they didn't get the recourse they thought they should have got, and they thought it was mainly down to the fact of their postcode or where they came from. And they're recognised communities that are considered disadvantaged. So for me, it kind of goes along with the class system. And the other 9 grounds are all well and dandy if you're coming from a certain class, but if you come from a disadvantaged class, it's hard trying to get access to the law for you to present your case as that you're being discriminated against under one of the 9 grounds. But if we had the 10th ground, I think it'd cancel out most of the 9 anyway. They'd all fall into the one category, you know, because maybe it's just a personal thing, but I just believe the 10th ground is the missing piece, because we've had a push for a long time to recognise women's rights and the right for same-sex marriage, anything like that. But if you're coming from a disadvantaged community, the 9 grounds don't really count for much, because you can be quite easily killed in a disadvantaged community, and there's a chance that your murder might never be solved. I'm just saying there's a vast contrast between communities in Ireland, between disadvantaged communities and communities that are more affluent. So that'd be my reason for it, I suppose. Basically, I'd call it neglect, classism, greed, want, lack of need, lack of opportunities, certain disadvantage. So there's a lot of words I could use to describe it. There's a lot of other words that we could go into different terminology to describe it, but I don't think I need to. For me, basically, neglect would be number 1, because if I was to bring it out to disadvantaged communities and then bring it into affluent communities, you'd see it yourself, the disadvantage that exists, that some communities are constantly patrolled by police, whereas other communities aren't. And the thing to remember about disadvantaged communities, there's money in them, but there's not as much money in them as there is being made in the drug trade. So I honestly believe a lot of the money that is spent on the drug trade is coming from affluent communities, but the disadvantaged community suffers the crime, suffers the stigma, and are classed as scumbags, labour junkies, whatever they want to call them. They always have a name for them, that way. Whereas when you go over to affluent communities, you have less chance of being arrested for partaking in your cocaine habit or whatever it is. You have. To me, it's a discrimination in itself, and it goes to the socio-economic discrimination, because you can walk around certain areas and you'll never get stopped by the police, and then you go to a disadvantaged area and you're probably going to get stopped 2, 3, 4 times, and you might actually live in that area. So I don't know why the police would be stopping people who live in their own area and harass them within their own communities, unless they wanted to antagonise the people. So I don't know, maybe it could be something along them lines. Maybe just my opinion, but a lot of it would boil down to my experience. I've witnessed a lot of it, and I'm in my 50s now, and I've been seeing it since I'm 9, 10, 11. I've experienced it, and I've experienced it myself. But I won't go into my own story, but I have experienced it many, many, many times, and it is not nice. And it's not nice when you see other people getting afforded protection within the law through the grounds of the legislation of equality law, and then you see people that are from disadvantaged communities, and there's absolutely nothing. There's no recourse for them. We have TDs and we have counsellors, but they might as well not be there, because there's very little they can do. So that'd be that's about 2,000 words too many, I think, there. But yeah, it's neglect and mismanagement, and it's deliberate as far as I'm concerned. So that's it.
I was brought up in Liverpool, and we were always discriminated against in England itself. If you had a Liverpool accent, or a northern accent, as a matter of fact, not just Liverpool, but a northern accent, you were the low class, you were working class. So we always felt it. We always felt second class citizens. And it's only as you grew up then you realise, well, what the heck's wrong? Why is this happening? And it is discrimination. You understand discrimination against the colour of someone's skin or their religion. It was very hard to understand you wouldn't get a job because you were from a certain area, no matter what your character was. So, and then when I moved around the world, I realised that it wasn't just a thing that was happening in England or in a city. It's something that was happening everywhere. And our longing for justice, I think, is in everybody, and that's why I think this should be brought into at least not, if not into law, but into realisation, not to discriminate against people just because they're from a certain area or background. So to judge people's character is what I found in life to be more important. I think there's more thieves with pens than there is. Anyway, I won't go into that, but yeah, I think everybody needs to be given a fair chance.
It was something that was really like meaningful, that there's people working so hard to do this, especially considering there's already so many grounds of discrimination in Irish legislation, in that legislation. So to hear that like there is something that isn't in there that is impacting so many people throughout the country very harshly on a daily basis, to hear that there's people working to do something about it as much as they can was something that was really cool and just really meaningful to me, especially like knowing my experiences growing up. And again, just to hear that there are people doing that really care about this issue and that are doing as much as possible in order to add the 10th. So my thoughts on it are nothing but positive, and I hope that ATD and more organizations and more politicians and ultimately the legislation listens to it and fix it out. From obviously reports and statistics tell you so much about what is going on. The class divide and income issue here was something that before coming to Ireland and seeing it with my own eyes, it was something that I was not aware of, fully because of my lack of research. But coming here and reading reports from ATD and other organizations or just government statistics from like the census, for example, is something that's very eye-opening, and that's just numbers. Going out and interviewing people, going out and literally just walking across the streets of Dublin shows so much. It's been a really big privilege to be able to have interviewed as many people, I feel like, as we did. I've gained so much knowledge and like a complete new perspective on an issue that, while I'm so aware that happens everywhere worldwide, it's living in another area besides your own and seeing that same issue occurring and impacting so many people is something that is super hard to deal with personally. But talking to people here and hearing about like their issues and how everything they have struggled because of their socioeconomic status, because of how people treat them, is something that you don't gain from just reading statistics. And I know there's so many perspectives on this issue, but it was talking to those who are impacted most by it that was really the most meaningful for me. Again, I learned so much from just hearing them, like the stories of the way people live and the way they have to, the things they do to keep going every single day for them, and if they have any for their children as well. There's just so many things to I can't even list, so many sacrifices that have to be made, which was, again, there's nothing like hearing people's stories. And I think we as a society, to move forward, and I know this is something that ATD really highlights, which is why I really appreciate this organization, because I've never been in an organization that really values the people's voices and talking to those who are directly impacted by what we are talking about. I've never met any an organization who does that as much as ATD. And again, and I know one of the things we emphasize is how listening to people's stories and hearing their testimonies have the biggest impact. And for sure that I think at the very basis, the very first step, very first level, that is, if one doesn't know really what to do or isn't in the power to do more, just truly listening is the best that we can do. Not just listening for our own gain, but listening for that human connection, which is something that is so vital to our lives and to our lives as humans. So yeah.